Imagine a toddler screaming in a grocery store parking lot, or an employee making a catastrophic error on a high-stakes project. Friction is inevitable. Our society's default reaction to these moments usually involves punitive discipline. We rely on timeouts, harsh reprimands, and zero-tolerance suspensions to force compliance. But relying on punishment ignores human biology. When we face a threat, the brain enters a state of toxic stress. The amygdala sounds an alarm, and executive functioning, the part of the brain responsible for logic and reasoning, immediately shuts down. In this heightened state, learning is biologically impossible. A reprimanded person feels isolated and unsafe. They aren't reflecting on their actions. Their nervous system is entirely focused on self-preservation. The root meaning of the word discipline is to teach or to guide. Yet in modern practice, it relies heavily on fear to enforce obedience. Creating actual behavioral change requires dropping the fear tactics. Instead, we have to engage the system our brains naturally use to process the world: narrative. This approach is known as peaceful discipline. It operates on one strict foundational rule: connection must occur before correction. This framework, called HUG, builds that connection. First, H. Hold your reaction. This mandatory pause stops an adversarial mentality. Next, understand their perspective and give them grace. Together, these tools frame the friction as an external problem to solve, not a personal attack. Taking the time to establish this emotional safety is mandatory. Without it, any attempt to correct behavior, teach a lesson, or introduce a new story will fail to register in the other person's brain. Narrative interventions generally happen across 3 chronological phases. The first is preventative story teaching, which you deploy long before a conflict ever arises. By talking through a potential challenge in advance, like explaining how a child should behave at a formal event, you provide a positive narrative blueprint. This gives the brain a safe, predictable anchor to follow when the actual stressful event occurs. The second phase involves in-the-moment interventions, deployed to diffuse active, real-time friction. For example, when a child has a severe tantrum, a parent might bypass the child's defensive mechanisms entirely by offering a silent hug. The physical connection communicates safety without demanding immediate verbal logic. You can also use playful, unexpected narratives to diffuse anger. A silly observation or an imaginative scenario shifts the brain's focus away from perceived threats and redirects it toward a shared experience. Connecting in the moment directly disarms the biological alarm system. It allows the individual to replace panic with curiosity. The third phase is retroactive intervention. We can see how this works on a macro level by looking at the Chicago public school system. Faced with high rates of conflict and suspensions, administrators at several schools abandoned zero-tolerance policies. Instead, they adopted restorative justice and implemented what they call peace circles. This model maps the elements of restorative practice culture change. Inside a peace circle, the involved parties must sit together, share their individual perspectives on the conflict, and mutually negotiate a plan to repair the harm. When students confront the human impact of their actions, behavior improves. At the Chicago Academy High School, the incidence of violent fights dropped from 35 in one school year down to just 2. Retroactive storytelling replaces standard punishment. It forces individuals to actively write a new, responsible chapter for themselves within their community. The success of these narrative interventions traces back to the hippocampus, the part of the brain that processes memories and contextualizes life experiences. This 20-fold spike in retention isn't just about memorizing facts. It's about the brain integrating an experience. In a restorative setting, narrating a conflict helps a student move from a reactive state of fear to a proactive state of regulation. By framing the incident as a coherent story, the brain can finally process the event, rather than just reacting to the stress of it. This process of narrative integration extends beyond simple behavior. By translating lived experiences into words and metaphors, we can search the unknown spaces that traditional discipline ignores. It allows us to process complex setbacks, from professional failures to the burden of personal loss, by transforming those experiences into productive knowledge. These principles remain the same whether you are navigating a conflict in a corporate boardroom, a high school classroom, or your own living room. True discipline is not a mechanism for control, but a process of collaborative teaching. By prioritizing connection, we provide the safety needed to help others understand their own history and write a more positive story for their future.